Good day, everybody, wherever you happen to be in the world. Thank you all for joining us for this webinar on the urban heritage in Nigeria. My name is Ishanlosen Odiawa, and I am Vice President of e-commerce Nigeria. Our session today will feature a presentation and a question and answer session. e-commerce Nigeria is very grateful to our distinguished speaker, Professor Ogundiran, who has accepted our invitation to share with us the great work that he's doing in archaeological research in Nigeria. Before I introduce our speaker, I would like to call on the Director General of the National Commission for Museums and Monuments of Nigeria, Professor Abba Issa Tijani, to give a few opening remarks. The NCMM is a major partner with e-commerce Nigeria in promoting heritage conservation in Nigeria, and Professor Ogundiran's research will no doubt be of great interest to the Commission. Professor Tijani, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone, and I believe afternoon or morning in some places. I just want to give a few remarks. I know you have a lot, and on behalf of the National Commission for Museums and Monuments. So on behalf of the board, management and staff of the National Commission for Museums and Monuments, I wish to congratulate e-commerce Nigeria for organizing this webinar. The researcher, Professor Akin Ogundiran, is highly appreciated for this timely research presentation on urban heritage in Nigeria, with focus on Oyo, Ile, and its satellite towns, 1570 to 1836, within which Old Oyo National Park falls. Interestingly, Old Oyo has been on Nigeria's UNESCO tentative list since 1995, and efforts are on to prepare it for nomination as UNESCO World Heritage Site. The findings of this research will no doubt help to add to the documentation of the site, thus enriching the information on the site. We will wish to request that the findings and recommendations be shared with the Commission. This research will also make significant contributions to the management of urban heritage, where most of Nigeria's heritage sites are located. It will, in addition, serve as a very useful resource material to the Commission and other relevant professional bodies in the quest to document, preserve, and project historical urban landscape. The Commission would like to collaborate with Professor Akin Ogundiran when the need arises, not only on urban heritage, but also other areas of his competence. We therefore always welcome your contributions to heritage management in Nigeria. For e-commerce Nigeria, I believe you will not relent in your efforts at promoting the conservation and management of Nigeria's cultural heritage. We look forward to your continued support to the work of the Commission. To the attendees, we welcome your active participation and valuable contribution will enrich the webinar. At the end, I hope everyone will have taken away something tangible. Thank you all for your time, and God bless you.
Thank you very much, Professor Tijani. We are very grateful for your time. We realize that it is the end of the workday for you there in Nigeria, so thank you for taking the time to honor.
Thank you very much, and I wish you all the best. I said, let me just do the opening remarks because I'm probably preparing to travel, and this is my last day of work before I travel. So the workload is really, really heavy, and I want to make sure that I clear my desk before I travel. And I thank you very much. I believe that you will excuse me. I will leave the meeting a few minutes, from now, so that you will continue with the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. So, ladies and gentlemen, permit me to introduce you to our speaker. Aki Ogundiro is Chancellor's Professor and Professor of Africana Studies, Anthropology and History at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte in the USA. He's also a visiting professor at the University of Ibadan in Nigeria and editor-in-chief of the renowned African Archaeological Review. Ogundiro's scholarship has focused primarily on the Yoruba world, Atlantic Africa, and the African diaspora. He's currently leading 2 research projects, one on the political economy and social ecology of the Oyo Empire, and the other on the cultural and landscape history of Oshogbo Grove, both in Nigeria. His research has been supported by several organizations, including the National Geographic Society, Wenard Gren Foundation, the American Institute of Archaeology, and the American Philosophical Society. He is a past fellow of the U.S. National Humanities Center, author of several publications. His latest book is The Yoruba, A New History, published by Indiana University Press in 2020. Ladies and gentlemen, I hand over the floor to Professor Ogundiro. Prof, over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Odua. And I want to thank my brother, the DG of National Commission for Museums and Monuments, Professor Tijani. It's a pleasure finally to see you on the screen. I remember when your appointment was announced, we had a very brief email exchange, and I look forward to the time that I will visit you in your office in Abuja and have deliberations and good, of course, with some good food as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Taking the time.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to thank all of you who have taken the time this evening in Nigeria or other parts of Africa, and our colleagues here on the other side of the Atlantic. Some people it's just 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock a.m. and some people have taken their early lunch so that they can be part of this presentation. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to do something that we don't normally do. This is supposed to come at the end of the presentation, but I will begin my presentation with acknowledgement. Various institutions that have supported my work. In Nigeria in particular, I want to thank National Park Service for generously supporting this project, including providing transportation when necessary. Of course, National Commission for Museums and Monuments has made the project possible because they give me the permit to do the work. And the University of Ibadan as well, His Imperial Majesty Oba Lamidi Adeyemi Aláàfin of Ọ̀yọ́, the descendant of the kings who built Oyo Empire, and fieldwork staff and students, as well as communities that have hosted us over the years. And these are names of several students who have been part of this project. And I'm going to actually read out their names. Some of them are here, but Dia Bayomi, Okopi Ade, Emmanuel Adera, Niya Degoke, Elizabeth Adeyemo, Bolu Ajayi, Adams Ali, Chiamaka Nyawu, Timileyin Ayelaigbe, Mercy Gold, Abiola Ibirogba, Macham Mangut, David Okanlawon, Kingsley, Dara Ojimba, Emmanuel Olaleye, Charles Oleru, Jacob James, Moses Akogun, Olumide Ojediran, Joseph Ogunsetire, Shegun Okegbele, and of course, my assistant director and geoarchaeologist on the project, Olusegun Mayib. Without their efforts and the hard work, this project would not have been possible. And of course, the project co-PIs, Professor Aliru, Dr. Gunfalakan, Bolanle Tubosun, Babatunde Agbaje Williams, Raphael Alabi, Emobo Irijeme, and Wenwu Tank. I thank all of you as well as the NCA, I mean the National Park technical staff. Cities in Nigeria is one of the densely populated countries in Africa, also the most populous African country, 213 million people plus as at last week. This population cannot just live in the rural areas. Our cities are growing because our population is growing. But our cities are also growing because they are magnets of opportunities. They are magnets of a wide range of things that only cities produce or can provide. So it is important, therefore, not simply to talk about our cities today, but to reflect on where we are coming from and where we are going. When we talk about cities in Nigeria, one of the cities that usually come up apart from Lagos is ancient Kano. Kano is the second largest cities in Nigeria today, but its history of urbanism goes back to the last century of the first millennium AD. That would be about 900 AD. Cities or urbanism in Nigeria generally date to that period, 750 to about 1000 AD. So this is an example of a city that has been thriving for more than 1,000 years. Another city that is very popular in our imagination, of course, is Benin City. Popular because we have several eyewitness accounts going back to the late 15th century, telling us about how surprised they were about this gem of urbanism in the tropics. Mostly these writings came from the Dutch as well as the Portuguese visitors. Benin City was highly regarded by these early visitors for its very straight and broad, clean streets, something that we can aspire to achieve in Nigeria today, to have broad, clean streets. 30 of these streets radiated from the Palace of Benin. And the Benin people also built underground drainage to carry water out of the city. Again, something that we can relearn from ancient Benin. Houses were built alongside the streets in good order, close to one another, with smooth and shiny walls. So another traveler, Lorenco Pinto, talked about how peaceful the city of Benin was. Houses were large and decorated with fine columns. The city was wealthy and industrious, and it is governed that there was no reason to have doors. Of course, it would be romantic to say that there were no thieves in Benin in the 17th century, but there was law and order. So this is what we learn about the past of Benin, but this is a lost past, as all of us know, that this grandiose as well as peaceful city is not what we have in Benin today or in many other cities in Nigeria. You better lock your door if you are going to bed. So we have, but this past has not transmitted into the present. So today, when we talk about the past Benin, we talk about these kind of walls that people have encroached upon. Many of us, archaeologists, preservation experts, were always worried and wondering what can be done to save these monuments that are the remnants of the past. So this is what the present-day city of Benin looks like. But the city of Benin that developed in the 12th and 13th century is a product of a very long history of embankments and walls that we call the Edoid embankments and walls, stretching, covering about 6,500 square kilometers. These are small communities with embankments and sometimes ditches. When you stretch this, when you stretch these walls in a long, in a straight line, they will cover 16,000 kilometers. And of course, this has attracted some kind of comparisons that I think are forced comparisons, but they make us feel good because, you know, we can say that it is this wall is 4 times longer than the Great Wall of China. But the Great Wall of China is still there to see, right? But these walls that our ancestors built between 500 and 1500 AD, they are no longer there. We have destroyed them. Yes, we can say that these walls consumed 100 times more material than the Great Pyramid of Cheops, but we can visit the Great Pyramid of Cheops. We cannot visit these walls anymore. And we can also say that, of course, in the Guinness Book of Records, this is the largest artworks before the mechanical era. The question is, how well have we done to preserve these artworks? So that leads me to this question. Is heritage only about monuments, materials, past glory, and preservation? Well, as many of us are beginning to realize that some of the challenges that we face today in this world and that we're going to face in the future, our science has not prepared us to cope with them. We can create models, we can anticipate problems, but we are realizing that the solutions to the challenges of urbanism today can be addressed when we think humanistically and consider the past and reflect on how our phobias solved problems by building cities. Archaeologists are always drawn to monumentality because usually that is what survives. Like this picture you're looking at with my friend Christopher DeCos, standing in the ditch of one of the walls in Ile-Ife, and I'm standing on top of one of the embankments. These are the kinds of things that attract archaeologists mostly. Push-off pavements, as well as stele, like the ones like Okpa or Ramia in Ile-Ife. But we also realize that we need to talk about the sociology and ontology of urbanism. How urbanism facilitated certain kinds of social interactions, and what kind of meanings and meaningfulness do these urban centers have for the people? How did we use cities and towns to solve problems in the past? Problems of population management, problems of managing resources. What kinds of everyday lives did urbanism foster and make possible? We are also now asking questions about urban ecology. What are the kinds of specific ecosystems that cities facilitated, and what kinds of interactions between nature and culture did city allow us to develop? So these are the kind of questions that myself and my team, we are trying to answer in the Yoruba region where I've been working for quite some time. So for those of us who may not be familiar with the subject matter, I don't want to assume that we all know Oyo or know about where cultural framework it belongs to. Oyo is one of the states that developed in present-day Southwest Nigeria or in present-day Yoruba-speaking region that cut across all the way to Togo. So, but it is not the first by any means in terms of cities. We have, it is part of a cultural landscape that a civilization that began to flourish about 800 AD, that centered on Ile-Ife, right here in central Yoruba-speaking area. And it is also, excuse me, and let me keep going. Yes. So by doing comparative work on Yoruba urbanism, we can say that there are certain general conditions that gave birth to city life or townships in Yoruba-speaking area. we tend to find urbanism in areas of resource abundance or resource scarcity. These are areas that attracted population. Also, towns and cities developed at crossroads or intersections, like trading centers, places that attracted many people, and that became a place of convergence. Towns and cities also developed as a result of political transformations. This is the kind of a top-down, such as conquest, that then created a massing of people. Then towns and cities also developed through collective action. This is bottom-up, whereby it came out of collaboration among different segments for their own self-preservation. Attributes of a Yoruba city or town include high population density. That is always one of the attributes of a Yoruba city, or let me say many cities and towns in the world. But the Yoruba city or town is also a segmented space whereby you have different interest groups or ethnic groups living side by side in a contiguous kind of relationship, what we call lineage or clans. I call them corporate groups. So they are diverse spaces, but what you have is integrated pluralism. So there's a plurality of ideas and people, but they are integrated. Then you also, a town or city in Yoruba world is also a place of high value chain and multiplicity of skills. So you have diversity of skills that are integrated, what we call communities of practice. And then you have economic specialization and market-centered production. So these are the general attributes of a Yoruba city. And the picture you are looking at is the typical layout. You always have the palace or Afin at the center, and you have streets radiating away from the palace or converging in the palace. Usually, the palace faces the east, and there will be a straight street directly in front of the palace. Of course, the market is always in front of the palace, the central market. This is the pattern you see in almost every Yoruba town or city. This and similar to what you see in Benin as well. So the question that we have to ask is, how did this kind of arrangement of a very distinct settlement pattern that we call urbanism, how did it develop among the Yoruba? As I said in a few minutes ago, we begin to see the emergence of this distinctive form of settlement between 750 and 1000 AD. And the idea of a town or city was linked to what we call divine kingship in Yoruba society. In my book, I argue that this is there's this dyadic relationship that's laid the foundation for Yoruba sociology about 750 years to 1000 AD, and that is the intersection of township that we call Ilu and Obalade divine kingship. And these innovations began somewhere in present-day Ekiti, Igbomina, and later Owo, as well as in present-day Ijebu area, in Idoko. So it's not like urbanism evolved in one place and then everybody copied it. No, it evolved about the same time in different places. But somehow Ile-Ife began to take advantage of these prior innovations at the beginning of the second millennium, towards the end of the first millennium, around 900 AD, but by 1000 AD, it began to build its own city. So unfortunately, in the Ekiti area, and I'm throwing this challenge to many archaeologists who are in this forum, it is important to pay attention to Ekiti speaking area today. That is, we are likely going to find evidence of early towns and cities in this area based on my own preliminary survey in this region with Professor Raphael Alabi. There are vast communities that are no longer existing, where you find iron smelting sites and mineral, and they are very vast. Some of them stretch about 1 kilometer in size. This is not something that we tend to associate with the Ekiti area. So that is the base. That is the place we have to pay attention to if you're going to understand the origins of Yoruba urbanism. But Ile-Ife has given us a more elaborate understanding of how this urbanism developed. We now know that up till about 900 AD, there were several communities that were scattered around Ile-Ife, and that and that's what I call the late formative period, and that around by the end of that first millennium, a new settlement configuration that we can call urbanism began to develop in Ife Bowl, what we call Ife Bowl, a very swampy, low-lying area. So that several of these communities were resettled within this space, and that is the beginning of the Ife classical period. So Ile-Ife has given us more elaborate understanding of the formation processes, but we need to see development in other parts of this region. Now, the topic of today, of course, is Oyo, but it's important for me to locate it within the cultural universe it belongs to. So when Ile-Ife was waxing strong as the first empire in the Yoruba-speaking world, from about 1200 to about 1400, Oyo itself was a small community very close to River Niger. It was a client state or client community to Ile-Ife. It was a trading partner, but also a client of Ile-Ife. It's one of those client states that Ile-Ife created to help it send out its rainforest products, including glass beads, including kola nut, including ivory. So Oyo developed from out of this kind of relationship. But something happened around 1400, between 1380 and 1420, that changed the course of history of this region, not just this region, across West Africa. And that is what we call the Little Ice Age. The Little Ice Age translated into droughts, cycles of drought and unstable climatic regime across West Africa. It had great implications because it led to collapse of several mega states like Mali, like Ile-Ife. It created a series of crises that led to the emergence of predatory states. And there was also demographic collapse due to this drought and the consequences of drought. And actually, Oyo itself, the first kingdom of Oyo itself, was abandoned as a result of this regional crisis. And its people migrated themselves in a town that we call Igbo today. But eventually, Oyo was able to regain its power and succeeded in pushing out external attack that had dogged it for about 150 years. So it returned, but not to the original homeland. It returned to a place now that we call Oyo-Ile. In our work in what is now Oyo, Old Oyo Metropolis, we are able to discover that before Oyo-Ile was occupied, what we call the metropolis of Oyo, there was about almost 2,000 years of history in this area, stretching from the early Iron Age, about 380 to 40 BC, to late Iron Age, between 800 and 1100. So these are sequences of occupations stretching back to 380 BC until the Oyo arrived around 1570 AD. And what they did was to, we don't know exactly the relationship between them and the original occupants of this area, but we know for sure that Oyo succeeded in moving them away from their original homeland and relocating them to what became the city of Oyo, right here, Oyo-Ile. So this picture you are looking at here are the loops of walls that surrounded Oyo-Ile, and thanks to the work by Robert Soper and Professor Agbaje Williams. Actually, Professor Agbaje Williams is on this webinar as well, and he did the first demographic archaeological work in Nigeria, actually the only one that I'm familiar, that I'm aware of. And he estimated that at the peak of Oyo-Ile in the late 18th century, there will have been at least 100,000 people living in this city. The city itself was about 8 by 10 kilometers in size. Can you please mute yourself? Thank you. So there were the city itself was about 8 by 10 kilometers in size, making it the largest city in West Africa south of River Niger between 1570 and 1840. So the next thing is, let me just, so my work, therefore, since 2017 has focused on understanding. I have a wide range of questions that I'm trying to answer in this region, but my work on Oyo Empire actually started in 2004, and that was when I focused my research on Ede-Ile, which was a colony of the empire, right here in present-day Osun State. And then after working there for several years, I decided to move this project to the metropolis area as well, in order to begin to ask new sets of questions. Now, the area where we work is a place that you need to be very brave to work in that kind of space. It's partially populated, and we have to set up our tents with our host, the Fulani-speaking people who now live in that area. Of course, there are also Yoruba-speaking people there as well, but we because of the logistics, we prefer to embed ourselves within this Fulani hamlet that you are seeing here. So these are the houses of the Fulani settlers, and these are our tents. And this, again, these are some of the members of the team. Here you can also see. So our tents in 2018 was only 2 or 3 tents, but as the number of the team grew, we now have 5, 6 tents. So it's a very good thing that our number is growing. There are more people interested in this project. And then I want to show this picture because Nigeria today, we are all encapsulated in all kinds of narratives about ethnic groups. And I want us to realize that not all Fulani are kidnappers. Amadu has been our host for the past 4 years, and we've never lost a single pen. A single pin. We leave our drones, everything in his compound, and nothing is lost. And I want to tell you that I cannot wish for a better human being than Amadu and his family. So when we started this work, we did all kinds of modeling in order to understand what the settlement landscape of Oyo metropolis looked like before the empire, based on the very little archaeological survey we have done. And what we realized was that there will have been very scattered hamlets, not even villages, hamlets, all over the space. I mean, all over the area. And this green dot shows the model. By the way, this is just a model. It is not the real thing, but it is consistent with our archaeological survey that we have done, that settlements are actually scattered all over the place. There's no, the only predictive factor for settlement location at this time were streamlines, or let me say water drainages. That was the only predictive thing. But you can see here that water channels are all over the place. That doesn't mean that these water channels run all throughout the year. No, they were seasonal. So the settlement landscape was predominantly hamlets and maybe few villages, but there were no towns. There were no large-scale settlements. But from about between 1570 and 1600, the settlement landscape changed drastically. And that's when you begin to see large towns like the ones you are looking at here, these red dots, or your itself. And what is strikingly different from the pre-1570 was these large settlements or towns, they tend to be located at the foot of hills. So these light color ones are hills, Bara, Koso, Atadi, and many other places, Ipapo as well. So there was a drastic change in settlement landscape from scattered hamlets to large towns and cities located at the base of hills. When Hugh Clapperton traveled across Oyo metropolis in 1826, this is what he said: the further we penetrated the country, the more dense we found the population, and civilization became at every step more strikingly apparent. Large towns at a distance of only a few miles from each other lay on all sides of us. This was what Clapperton noticed. More than 50 kilometers before he arrived in Oyo-Ile, and we are seeing this same pattern that almost every 4-5 kilometers you travel or you walk around, you will come across a large town, especially if there is a hill around here. There. So they basically incorporated the hill into their security network. So our work is on Oyo Empire is more than studying cities. We are broadly interested in questions about the relationship between the empire, the source, as well as household. How do these three elements fit into one another? We're asking questions about how domestic economy was mobilized to serve the political economy of the empire. But in order for the empire to exploit individuals and households, they needed to rearrange the settlement landscape. And that's when you begin to have towns and cities, right? Also, labor organization. Apart from these towns and cities, there were also villages that were set up, in order to maximize the use of human resources as well as the natural resources. So we're also interested in the urban ecology, the ecosystem of urbanism, and the environmental history that gave them resilience. Then how Oyo Empire and these cities and towns managed and maximized resources. So these are the broad questions that we're asking. But then there are also specific questions, which include how the empire transformed the domestic economy and social relationships at the family and household level, and how this affected the meaning of corporate identity and individuality and personhood. So we are trying to locate individuals and households within these urban spaces, because if we do not do that, we'll end up writing meta history of cities in which people are not there. But we really want to understand the everyday lives of individuals and families within these urban spaces. We are also interested in understanding how labor was organized to support the enterprise of the empire, and the implications for class formation, social stratification, and hierarchies. Without understanding these three elements, class formation, social stratification, and hierarchies, we are not going to understand how these cities develop and why they eventually collapsed. So we are also asking the question that, given the ecological fragility of the period of the empire, 1580 to 1840, how did the metropolitan government manage resources? Don't forget that the whole period of Oyo Empire was still part of the Little Ice Age, when ecological instability was the order of the day. It could rain very well for 3 years, and then for the next 2 years, the rain may not come in an appreciable amount. So please mute yourself. Thank you. Now, another question we're asking is, what are the long-term adaptive or creative strategies that sustain the metropolitan core for your empire? I mean, given the instability, the ecological instability, how was it possible for this community or for this state to create the most densely urban landscape in West Africa, south of River Niger, or the most densely populated urban landscape in the Yoruba-speaking world? So we are also asking these kinds of questions. So our work has focused in the past 5 years on 3 settlements: Oyo-Ile itself, the mega city, then the nearby town, Bara, which was a necropolis, which was a place where the kings of Oyo were buried, but it was also a town in its own right. And in the next slides, I'm going to show that. And then the royal town, Koso. Koso was was the place where Shango religious center was based. It was a royal town. The king could go there, for a week or 2, it's like a country home for the king, but it's also where the highest priesthood of Shango was based. So we have focused our attention on these three sites, in addition to conducting archaeological survey in different parts of the region. So as Professor Tijani mentioned, Oyo-Ile itself is within the Old Oyo National Park. I believe the 4th largest park in Nigeria. If you have not visited Old Oyo National Park, please take time to visit it. But the 2 other sites I mentioned, Bara and Koso, surprisingly, they are not under Old Oyo National Park. I guess when the leaders that were thinking about this were preparing the document to make this Old Oyo National Park, they forgot that there are other important archaeological sites nearby to include. So Oyo-Ile is the only protected site. Those 2 other sites are not under any institutional protection today. Of course, as I said before, archaeologists are always attracted to monuments, including myself. Because if you're going to understand the way an urban space was designed or managed, you need to understand the road system, you need to understand the perimeter walls. So we spend some time trying to familiarize ourselves with the perimeter walls of Oyo-Ile that I show you in the previous slide. There are about 6 concentric circles or semicircles that surrounded Oyo-Ile, and the one you are looking at is the main inner wall. Of course, today what you see is this embankment, the remnant of it, and the ditch. So I've used this line to show the topography, the macro topography of this area. So this will have been the embankment, the wall that surrounded the inner part of the city, and this will have been the ditch, which is a very typical pattern for many towns in Yoruba-speaking world. So when you go to Oyo-Ile, you don't really see any standing building unless you are an archaeologist and you are ready to go through these acacia thorns to see the remnants of some of the walls. So this is what the house walls in very few places look like. But these are very, very few, as well as this kind of wall, which is in the outermost part of Oyo-Ile. What you see for the most part are these undulating topography. And what you are seeing here is a residential complex that we excavated for 2 years. So this is what you see. So it has to take a trained archaeological eye to identify residential features when you see them, and then be able to determine or decide whether you want to excavate it or not. So this is part of the landscape, or let me say the dynamics of the landscape that you have in Oyo-Ile today. that most of the walls have deflated, they have collapsed, deflated, and turned into linear mounds, like the one you are seeing here. But these standing walls are very, very few and rare to see today in Oyo-Ile. And as time goes on, we are going to lose all of them. Now, these perimeter walls, however, they are important because they give us a sense of how the city was organized in terms of its population. At the center of Oyo-Ile was the palace. And you can see that the palace was built at below these high-rising hills, granitic hills, about 380 meters above sea level. In front of the palace is the main market, Akesan market. The citizens of the city mostly live within this inner wall. But as you travel out of the center, the social class declined. People who live here for the most part are the underclass. Those also include enslaved population. And this is where the cattle, the horses of the elite were located. And the people who manage those horses, of course, they are members of the underclass class. I'm sorry, members of the underclass. Again, mostly enslaved population. So, which is ironic because it means that the security of the empire basically was in the hands of this underclass. No Oyo citizen would touch a horse. They will ride it, but they will not be the caretaker for the horse because that job defined whether you are a citizen or you are not. Now, these walls therefore served as a way to define the building of the walls itself will have been a way to create community solidarity and political identity. So the walls were built through civic role, civic efforts. But there were ways also for controlling and regulating movement of people for the purpose of internal security and also for the purpose of tax collection. So far, there were about 17 gates that led in or out of these different loops. So these gates were managed by agents of the state. They collect taxes. They also determine who entered and who they refuse access to enter. So you can see that for you, if you're living here, for you to get out of the city itself, you have to pass through several gates. There's nothing more monitoring than that. Then when you are returning, you have to provide taxes, levies. So most people will go out to their farms. When they are returning in the evening, they have to provide something to the state agents. And what they pay to re-enter was what the city also used to manage the affairs. In fact, one of the important civil servants in Oyo was a surveyor who was in charge of making sure that these walls were maintained periodically. These walls were also ways of institutionalizing inequality and hierarchy-based social order. One thing I want to mention is that when Oyo people returned to this space in 1570, they were not the only ones who came. They were joined by the Musi, they were joined by the Bariba, they were joined even by some Nupe, they were joined by some Wansagari people. So right from the beginning, Oyo-Ile was a cosmopolitan, multi-ethnic space that was integrated into a Yoruba universe. And when you look at some of the facial marks that we still bear in the Yoruba today, you will not be surprised that they look exactly the same as the facial marks that you will see on the faces of Musi-speaking people. Because the Musi and the Bariba, the Oyo relied on them for as horsemen, as well as what do you call it, mercenaries, to fight the wars that eventually allowed them to resettle in the general area of their ancestral land. So Oyo from the beginning was a cosmopolitan space, and this cosmopolitanism is very important when we talk about Yoruba cities, Yoruba towns. These are always heterogeneous spaces integrated under a constitutional monarchy. So these walls also allowed for a centralized political control and bureaucracy to manage both private and public spaces. And lastly, they demonstrate evidence of methodical urban planning for social and physical health of the people, as well as the livestock. So there are rules about what kinds of livestock you can keep within the core living space. Instead, the livestock, especially horses, were maintained in the outskirts of the city. So when we started this work, one of our interests was to figure out the technology for building some of these perimeter walls. And we selected an area here. We did it like a cross-section excavation right in front of the palace wall. And this is Mr. Mayib and myself discussing some of the logistics for excavating this wall. So what you are looking at here used to be a standing wall in front of the palace that separated the palace from the market, Akesa market. Now, let me give the students who excavated this big credit, because in fact, I had to return to the US for a program for about 2 weeks. And that's when Mr. Mayib led the students to the, most of them are graduate students as well. Mr. Mayib is also a PhD student at University of Ibadan. So it is to their credit that they excavated this. I was just communicating with Mr. Mayib about logistics when I was away. And then let's see. So we succeeded in excavating about 20-meter long. I think I can boast that this is the longest trench in Nigerian archaeology so far. And if I'm wrong, please correct me. But it's just a 1 meter wide, because what we are trying to understand is the technology for building this wall, and then what might have been the processes of its collapse, taphonomy. So we're trying to understand the post-abandonment processes of decay. And one of the things that is very surprising even to me was that we're able to discover from the rubbles fragments of walls that were smoothened and polished. It's like they cemented the walls, So we're able to find several fragments. Initially, we thought they were pottery, but on a closer look, we realized that these were actually fragments of the walls that were polished and well smoothened. And then we must have lifted about 3 or 4 tipper loads of soil from this very small excavation, so that by the time we are done, we decided that it would not be helpful to backfill it. Rather, we should, because this kind of excavation, Robert Sopot did something similar to this back in the 1970s, but we feel that it's no longer preserved. That instead of covering it, we should actually preserve it to provide other scholars opportunity to study the stratigraphy, to provide tourists opportunities to look at the site. So we ended up covering it with corrugated iron sheet. And our colleagues from the University of Ibadan and Ife, Professor Ogunfolakan, Dr. Tubosun, they visited the site, Professor Aliru as well, members of the National Park Service, they've seen it, so that to give tourists who go to Oyo Ile as well something to admire and appreciate. Unfortunately, this site has not been maintained, And I'm calling on those who have the responsibility to maintain this to please come to our assistance to build a proper cover for this space, because I think it's we should not lose it. We should build something that will allow visitors to appreciate some of the previous some of the work that we've done, but also some of the architectural surprises of the past. Now, another thing that we are looking at by studying the landscape of Oyo-Ile is how they manage water. They practice what I call some elements of civil engineering, in the sense that they were diverting water from the hills down to artificial ponds. And that is one of the ways in which they were able to support the large population that lived in this place between 1570 and 1840. So these are some of the artificial ponds that they built, which were linked to water channels from the hills. Another thing that we focused on is the domestic architecture, trying to understand social interactions at the domestic level. Of course, domestic space is not just a place where you eat and sleep or procreate. It's also a space where you work. Yoruba architecture has very diverse forms, from the simple longhouse to the courtyard architecture, but this courtyard architecture tends to be the architectural form associated with Yoruba towns and cities. And the elite tend to build multiple courtyards, like this palace of Ile-Ife. You know, these are some of the Yoruba architecture. But when you go to Oyo-Ile, of course, you don't see these standing walls anymore. They are these plummeted, decayed outlines that you see. So we have done some excavation in an area we call MJR1, which is within the palace wall, which is a double courtyard with an outer entrance, but most activities of this household happen within the second courtyard. And that's why we have been able to, with careful excavations, we have been able to delineate some of the walls that will have supported these structures. Some of the activity areas as well have been found. And by excavating this residential structure, it gives us some sense about how the city will have been abandoned around 1836. That for some families like this, it was a very sudden event. They basically left their cooking pot. Unfortunately, we did not meet any cow meat in them that we can eat, but that's another story for another time. But they've all decayed. So we have the serving bowls, we have the storage bowls. So it's a very fascinating arrangement that we see in this household. But of course, not only the pots, we also find a wide range of artifacts, cowrie shells, which were used as money. We find that they were actually making chalcedony or jasper beads in this household. This is what we call akun in Yoruba. These are those red beads. So they were making them, and because we also have the polishing stones they used to make these beads. Of course, we also have sheshefun beads, the white beads, as well as spindle for making cotton, tobacco pipes, very ubiquitous kind of artifacts that you will see in any 17th, 18th century West African site, as well as these imported blue rimmed glass cups. This is from online. This one is what we excavated. So this kind of glass wares were made in Napoleonic period in Northern Europe between France and Germany. So you can see that Oyo-Ile was plugged into the Atlantic economy trade. And of course, we also have bottles of gins coming from the coast. we should remember that Oyo actually controlled several port towns. I mean, it did not directly own them, but it conquered several port communities, especially Ajashe, where the French were very prominent. And some of those European traders, when they arrived in Ajashe, they have to send certain items to the king 320 kilometers away. So it shows the broad Atlantic framework in which Oyo Ile was operating as well. Not surprisingly, we also have horse remains, which shows that they were not just using their horses to fight. When these horses became old or they were suffering from sickness, they killed them and they converted them to food. The second site I want to talk about is Koso. Koso is about 14 kilometers from Oyo Ile. Professor Agbaje Williams did the first work in this area as well, and I had the privilege of following him there. Actually, we did some excavation there when I was very, very, very young in the mid 1980s. But Professor Aremu also worked there, and this drawing came from Professor Aremu. This is where you find the most monumental buildings, I mean, walls still standing in the entire Oyo metropolitan area. These walls are about 23 feet high and about 3.5 feet wide. They are quite a sight when you see them. Unfortunately, nothing has been done to preserve and protect these walls since they were found by Agbaje Williams in the mid 1980s. That means that these walls are very close to collapse if nothing is done to preserve them. You can see that they will fall down any moment from now. I've tried to apply for funding on this side of the Atlantic to preserve them, but we have not been successful. So I use this opportunity to call on those people who are in charge. NCMM, for example, should take an interest in making sure that we do not lose these walls to the elements. They have something to tell us, to teach us about the past urbanism in this area. But Koso itself, you can see, was quite an impressive town in size. These walls are still being mapped. Professor Aremu did not finish mapping it. We are hoping that in future we will complete the mapping. So it's a community of about 3 kilometers in size, which is very impressive for any Asian town. And this is the Acropolis area here. This is like a watch tower right here on the hills. This is where, according to oral tradition, Shango priests lived, and that Shango himself will have lived here according to mythology. But we realize that indeed there were people that were living on these hills, whether it's Shango or someone else. We have pottery, we have walls, you can see. So, but we have to understand that these high rises or these high elevations, they were part of the security network of the empire. It allowed you to see far off so that you can monitor movement of people, including friends and foes. The third community we have been working on, in fact, we've worked here more than any other site so far. That is the royal necropolis of Oyo. This is where, according to oral traditions, Oyo kings were buried. More than 24 kings of Oyo were supposedly buried here in a place called Bara. We have done surveys and excavations here since 2017. We have, as you can see on the left side, this is a 6.2 kilometer settlement in circumference, about 2 kilometers in diameter. In total, the walls are about 10.2 kilometers. So this is not a small place. We have done about 85 test excavations on 11 transects in order to map the archaeological features as well as natural resources of this community. And that means that we have done more excavations on this site than any site in Nigerian archaeology. Now, you can tell me that I'm boasting, but I'm just expressing how rigorous our team has been working to mark this site at the space of 5 to 10 meters. You know, and we still have more work to do in this area. If I can find the actual figure. So we have excavated 236 square meter area here. So that means about 100 meter long by 3. That gives you a sense of how large our excavation. Of course, some of the excavations are very shallow, just 60 centimeter, but some are also about 1.5 meter in depth, you know. Next. So now these are the walls surrounding the town, and there's an inner wall as well here. And I will tell you something about these inner walls, what they were used for. So unlike Oyoile, where you have sand as the embankment of the perimeter walls, in Bara, because of the nature of the landscape, there are no soils to dig in some areas. So what they did was to use granite blocks to build the walls. And this is one of the walls. This is David Okanla standing on it, just to give a perspective. We estimate that, I estimate that between 264,000 to 660,000 granitic blocks will have been used to build just 4 kilometers long of this wall. This is not a small feat. And I'm drawing our attention to it because if this place was not important, why would they have expended labor to build this wall? So this is an important place. Now, we have not found any evidence that they buried the kings of Oyo here, but if we do find remains of the dead kings, we are not going to exhume them, as I promised the king of Oyo, Alaafin of Oyo, that if we come across human remains, we will of course like to take samples for study, but we are going to rebury any remains that we find here. So the investment of labor here is very impressive. But we also discovered that there are stone quarries where they actually obtain these rocks near where we are working this year. So as you travel down this slope, you will get to this quarry here. So they were lifting the quarries below the hills and bringing them up to build the walls right here. Now, like in Oyoile, they also practice what I call water engineering here. Some of these walls were built to divert water from the hills right here. So these walls were ways to prevent water from spilling into the residential area. This is a low-lying area, so they deliberately push water in this area here, as you can see, in order to maximize the agricultural area or areas where they can water their animals. So, and then they diverted the rest out of the town. So people can come here to fetch water in this larger stream here. So the settlement itself is within these red dotted lines. That is where the settlements were. But we are also discovering that this settlement space was segregated. It appears, and I'm not, and this is very tentative. It appears that people of lower status lived on the western side, and people of higher social rank lived on this other side. We don't know whether this wall was built for class segregation. We are not sure yet, but we are still working on it. So we have done some excavations in what I call the lower status area of Bara. And that's where you see these long houses. So instead of the typical courtyard system of architecture that you see in Yoruba towns, here you have long houses like barracks. This is where some of the royal dependents will have lived. And the ceramics that we see in this area also indicates that they were not people that were the community was not interested in elaborate food service. Instead, you see mostly storage pots, cooking bowls, serving bowls were very, very rare. And this indicates that these people might have eaten their food in a communal area, or in a communal, in a kind of a very ephemeral containers like leaves, calabash, and that it was not a focus of cooking. They might have been food might have been supplied to them because they were dependents of the state, and their work was tied to the need of the state. So this is not a self-reproducing household. As I'm getting to the end of my talk, so bear with me. One of the things that is also important to us is the role of unstable climate regime on the settlement history of this area. This is one of several dry stream beds in this area, which serve as indicators of past instability. So one of the things we are doing is use palynological evidence to reconstruct the environmental history of this area, stretching from the 380 BC to 840 AD. What was the impact of this dry stream bed on let's say, the abandonment of the area in about 170 AD, or the abandonment of the site in 1100 AD, or the reoccupation of the area in 1300 AD. So these kinds of questions are important. They're also important to understanding why Oyo Empire also collapsed in about 1840. I want to draw our attention to the fact that in 1817, series of drought events led to famine. And of course, there were political instability, independent of the drought, but also sometimes arising from the drought. So whenever you have lack of food, there will be social unrest. Of course, there was an underclass rebellion in Oyo in 1817. I am speculating that the underclass rebellion will have taken place where a large concentration of the underclass people lived. And that would be in the northern area of the city and in places like Bara. When this revolt happened, many of them did not have to go through the city. They just went out and go to Ilorin, where an Oyo military commander was already fomenting trouble of his own. So so our work is trying to raise questions as well about not how the city was built, but how the city eventually came to an end. So the fate of urbanism in the time of distress. As archaeologists, we are not interested in just documenting what we found. We also use what we found to reflect about the possibilities of the present and the future. One day in, I think in 2018, I was telling my students in the field, I said, because it was so quiet. And I was telling them that once upon a time, the men and women who live in this area, they will have thought that their city would never come to an end. Then I say, do you know that one day it is possible for a place like Lagos to become a ghost town? And somebody say, oh, it is impossible. I said, yeah, exactly. That is what the Romans said about their city. That's what the other people said about their city. I say, cities have to be managed. Cities have to be maintained. Not only cities, any social complexity has to be maintained. I say, Lagos is now suffering from sea rise. then we are looking at a disaster in the future. So now what is happening in Bara is kind of something that I also want to draw our attention to. Bara, the necropolis of Oyo Empire, was now under threat. From logging, you can see there are loggers in the site cutting down trees. What are they using the trees for? They are using them to make charcoal. This kind of work destroy archaeological sites, as you can see right here. Of course, farming is also another thing that they are doing there, which means that sites are being destroyed. So many of these sites are very shallow. They are only 60 centimeter deep. So when you do this kind of arable farming on them, you basically turn over archaeological sites and destroy them. So you can also see that the trees have been cut. All these stumps are red wood, hardwood, that have been cut to make charcoal. When we started our work in 2018, there was no one living within the settlement of Bara. But now, hamlets have been built within the site. So it's just a matter of time before this site will be destroyed if nothing is done to save it. So we are very grateful to individuals, journalists who have come to our aid to spread the words about what we are doing in Bara, with the hope that people with authority will be able to come in and preserve the site. In addition, there are guests that we have hosted at the site, explaining the importance of what we are doing to them. And earlier this year, I did an exhibition on our 5-year research in Oyo town itself. And Alaafin of Oyo was there, and I think he had a lot of questions for me. He was impressed to see what his ancestors accomplished. So to close, heritage, let me leave us with these words. Heritage is what you claim and use. If you don't claim it, it is no longer yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Ogundiro. Wow, you've taken us on quite a journey. First of all, across West Africa, and then now you've brought us straight to Oyo-Ile. You've raised a lot of questions for us about, I think your last question particularly, your closer, is the one that's very important. If we don't use heritage, if we do not claim it, then it no longer belongs to us. You have drawn our attention to the phenomenon of climate change in the history of Oyo-Ile, which is very relevant as part of the discourses that are ongoing right now. Today is actually the last day of COP26. And when I see what you have presented regarding how they managed water resources on their site, in a place that is today, we can see the landscape that you presented, which is almost, it's almost savanna now. We ask ourselves the questions whether there are lessons to be learned today regarding water management in urban Nigeria. The fragments of polished walls that you presented were also very important, interesting. And I wonder if you've carried out any tests on the composition of those fragments of walls, because we know that in Benin, for instance, the walls of the Benin, the fluted walls of the Benin buildings were polished in palm oil to render them impermeable. So it will be interesting to see the outcomes of your research on that. I think one thing I also found very fascinating in your narrative was the fact that we heard you talk about your teachers. The work you're doing, you did with your teachers. They taught you. Today you're going forward with that. It also tells us about the work we're doing in Heritage, which is about passing on the baton, sharing knowledge and passing it on. And I hope that the people that you're teaching today also will take part of that dream and they will move forward with it as we work together to build heritage in Nigeria and conserving heritage in Nigeria. Social stratification is not a new construct in human societies. And we see that the kind of stratifications that occurred in the old Oyo are also this kind of stratifications that lead to social tensions in today's society. They may not be built with walls, but they exist. The inequalities of our times are very evident of the kind of social tensions and civil unrest that we see across the world. Thank you again very much. And I would like to just open the floor for questions. There's one that has arrived for you in the chat. And then maybe we'll take that one first. And if anybody wants to speak up, please raise your virtual hand. Prof, maybe you can stop sharing your screen now so that we have the full screen. Thank you.
Okay. Thank
yes,
you.
Thank you, sir. Yeah.
Let me figure out how to do that. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. So, so we have one question for you in the chat. I don't know if the person who wrote it would want to speak up, or I think Cameron Monroe, you have a question in the chat. Would you like to speak up, please? Cameron, are you there?
I can see it. I can read the question. The question is, thank you, Cameron. First, are you at the point yet in your excavations where you can see any evidence of ethnic heterogeneity of Oyo-Ile that might track with the expansion of the empire? The second is, in thinking about the relationship between household and empire, are you considering how Oyo's expansion impacted the gendered division of labor in Oyo's communal households? Wow, that's great questions. No, the first question is no. We are not at the point where we can trace ethnic heterogeneity of Oyo-Ile. The reason is this. At the beginning of my talk, I refer to a concept which I call integrated plurality. In order to maintain a social space, it's okay for people to join you, to invite different kinds of people, but you must all subscribe to certain principles that sometimes do not leave material culture behind for us to, so that the heterogeneity may, I do not know what kind of material that will reveal. The reason is that anywhere you excavate, ceramics are the same. I mean, ceramics are basically the same. Because the different people that resided in Oyo, they did not maintain, they might maintain their own identity based on where they came from, but their citizenship belonged to Oyo. They were integrated into the political and economic life of Oyo Empire. So for example, the Bashorun of Oyo, the line that were Bashorun in Oyo for a long time, they were Ibariba. Okay, so that is where I argue in my book. That's where names like Ga came into being, because their ancestry is Ibariba. So in Yoruba urban space, your heterogeneity is not, well, you can claim your heterogeneity by talking about where your ancestors come from, but you are citizens, but you are bona fide citizens of where you live now. And those usually don't live, it's not easy to identify the, in the Oriki, you can easily see that, but in material culture, it's difficult. We are going to have to do several excavations in different parts of the city to begin to talk about heterogeneity. The second question is, yes, Oyo Empire, transform gender of people in order to maximize resources. But we also have to understand that Oyo was operating within the rules of Yoruba gender practice, whereby biology was not the primary, the only way to define gender. Women refer to themselves as social male, and there were men that were also feminized, especially eunuchs. There were many eunuchs in our empire. So Oyo engaged in some kinds of the engineering of gender, but the gender division of labor, however, followed the typical Yoruba cultural gender division of labor, in the sense that there are certain work that women do. For example, potting. Men rarely engage in in pottery making. Men can dig the soil, the clay, but pottery making was predominantly in the domain of women. Blacksmithing was also predominantly in the domain of men. That doesn't mean that women were not part of some chains of that in that production, but for the most part, men were blacksmiths. So, and that is where Oyo now had to engage in gender reengineering, especially in the royal house, so that men could do what women would do and women could do what men could do, depending on the ratio of biological men and women that they had in the palace. So that is the best way I can answer that question.
Thank you very much, Prof. Your next question comes from Rachel Engman. I see a hand raised, but I'll give the floor to the person after we've gone through these questions. So, could you tell us more about the community engagement and response to your work? You mentioned that chiefs were also concerned about the burial. Also, you spoke about security for the empire, which was carried out by the enslaved. What kinds of material evidence have you found for them? Lastly, what is the cow meat story that you said is for another time?
A cow meat? Well, let me talk about security. This is an argument I'm making that given the class-based division of labor about maintenance of horses, horses were the backbones of your empire. Their military, their security dependent on their cavalry. And these horses require enormous amount of support or maintenance. Horses were the most expensive properties of your elite. Of course, only the elite could own horses, right? And by the same token, they are the only ones that by sumptuary law, they are the only ones that can consume horse meat. You cannot sell horse meat in the market. Only the elite can eat it. It makes sense, right? You don't want commoners stealing horses or killing horses and being able to sell them in the market. So that is one issue. So now only people of lower social class or social status, especially the enslaved, people who are tributes, who are sent to Oyo as tributes, they are the ones who engage in maintaining horses. Now, to maintain one horse could take the full-time job of 2 adult men, 2 adult male. Their full-time job can be just to maintain one horse, including feeding the horses, cleaning them, washing them, grooming them, veterinarians, all of these. Of course, most of these people, of course, came from Central Sudan. They came from Central Sudan because there were very large Central Sudanese enslaved men and women in Oyo Empire. So, of course, they are not the only ones. There were other people from other parts of the empire as well. But the primary people who maintained the horses, they came from Central Sudan, from servile background. Now, some of them, their descendants became citizens eventually, but for the most part, those are the people that maintained the horses. So that's why I say that it's ironic that the security of the empire was in the hands of people of servile background. And the first question was about community outreach. Well, the outreach we have done so far on this project is about education. It's about informing the public about what we are doing, why it is important, and what people should do about it. So it is a kind of a project that I do not want it to reside only within the academics, within the journals and books. I want it to also reach the local people. That's why we did that exhibition I mentioned earlier. That's why we did that exhibition, and we're going to use that exhibition. There will be a version of it that will become a traveling exhibition that we're going to send it to schools send it to the local community where we work, so that even people who are not Yoruba, who are living in that area today, they can see that there's a history that preceded their arrival in that area. So that is one of the things we are doing. So our outreach efforts so far are about public education. We are also involving the local community in our excavations. We recruit young men who are interested in working with us, and in the process, they ask questions about what we are doing. We share what we are doing with them. So that is the limitations of our outreach so far.
Thank you very much, Prof. The next question is from Aliyu Abdu. He's asking, what's the reason for the abandonment of Oyo? And does their new settlement have correlation with the abandoned site?
Why were these sites abandoned? The second question again?
Does the new settlement, the Oyo of today, have a correlation with the abandoned site?
Thank you. Let me answer the second one. It's very easy. Yes, it has correlations. It has correlations in terms of the planning. Oyo, the present Oyo, several kilometers from the old one, okay? But the goal was to replicate the political institutions in the old one, in the present one. But not everyone from the capital moved to the present Oyo. Don't forget that the city collapsed in a very, not suddenly. It took about 20 years for the city to collapse gradually. It was a gradual depopulation before finally in 1836, the city collapsed. So it took about 20 years. So the reasons are not, people always say that, oh, the Fulani invaded Oyo. That's not true. There was no Fulani invasion of Oyo. There were multiple events that led to the collapse. And I think one of them, which I mentioned in my talk, has to do with ecological crisis. It is true that Oyo was built in the middle of an ecological crisis, the Little Ice Age. But eventually the elite began to look away from that problem, and they began to engage in their own internal conflicts. That internal conflict, the preoccupation with their own rivalries, which started around 1776, eventually prevented them from addressing the needs of the state, addressing the needs of the population. On top of that, ecological crisis sparked at the beginning of the 19th century. So what I'm trying to say is that climate change is not always an event that leads to a doom. If you prepare for it and you anticipated it, our human society is so creative that if we apply our creativity, we can solve the problem. But when we are distracted, and political leaders are distracted by irrelevancies or by their ego, then they will not be able to find solutions that will cope with climate change. As we are seeing today, we have all the tools to cope with climate change, but there's no political will. Or let me say there are very little political will. The same thing happened in Oyo, that they knew that this is a recurring problem. Drought will lead to famine. So political elite were so distracted that they did not prepare for what happened in the early 19th century, and eventually it's now exacerbated, it's intensified other social problems. And those social problems also meant that the poor people and other underclass, they became discontented that there was a revolt in 1817. Those who revolted in 1817 were not just slaves. There were also citizens of Oyo who were poor, who were underclass. In my book, chapter 8, I call it perennial inequality. When you have perennial inequality, it gave space for poor citizens to their condition is not, is in fact, it is worse than the condition of the enslaved. At least the enslaved can eat horse meat, they can get other things, but the poor citizens had nothing. And those two connived together and they started the metropolis, and they began to create trouble for the empire in the provinces. You see, so that is the foundation of the collapse of the empire. So the Fulani element came later. They just hijacked, or let me say, they took advantage of the internal crisis in Oyo. They did not invade Oyo at all.
Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you very much, Prof. I think we can draw a lot of parallels on the social tensions with the times we live in today, if we look at them very closely. The next question that we have is from Samson Faboye, and he's asking, would your research consider the trade links between the Oyo and Borgu kingdom, noting that horses were imported from the Borgu, and how did it affect the security of the Oyo Empire? Secondly, why will the Oyo people prefer to settle at the foothill rather than building on the hilltop? Actually, that's a very incisive question, because people normally would settle on top of a hill for defensive reasons. So over to you, Prof.
Thank you. Yeah, if you are trying to build a city, you will not go to the hilltop to settle, because there's no. Now, let me put it this way: where these people lived was high-rise ground. They were not low ground. So when you look at the topography, the elite and the citizens still lived in a more or less higher topography than. So they left the low ground for agriculture. So the settlement pattern is still, what you will expect in any society that is trying to expand. So if you go to the hilltop, basically your king is separated, totally separated from the people. That is not the I will call it, that is not the political ideology of Yoruba city. The king was not supposed to be totally removed from the people. People should be able to go into the palace in and out every day as they wished, because the king was actually elected indirectly by the commoners through their leaders. That's how the king was. The king doesn't make himself. The people make the king. So you do not want to have that separation between. So and those hilltops were not, they are not really, that would be living on top of the granite. That is not an efficient use of resources. The second thing, the first question, yes, Oyo bought its, Oyo bought their horses from Bogu. They also bought it from the Musi. They bought it from the Mande. In fact, they bought their horses mostly from the Mande. Not just from the Bogu, from the Mande, but the Bariba and the Musi and even Bogu, they were always allies of Oyo. And because of time, I don't want to go into the details of how the alliance started, but the alliance started about early 15th century against the expansion of the Songhai. Because those people were threatened by the expansion of the Songhai after Mali Empire collapsed. So Oyo developed what I call one of the largest political alliance in West African history to save themselves, but also those people saw that alliance as a way to repel Songhai and the Nupe, who are infiltrating into their territory. And that is why the alliance, and that's why even in 1836, when Oyo faced the Ilorin, the jihadists in Ilorin, those people also came to the aid of Oyo, because they knew that if they were able to succeed in that war, they will succeed also in repelling the jihadists who are moving from the north. So there's always been interaction and collaboration between Bogu, Musi, Ibariba, as well as Oyo.
Thank you very much, Prof. I know that there was a hand raised. I think it was Elizabeth Adeyemo. I don't know if you still want to ask your question because we.
Excuse me. You said that Dr. Ungman, Rachel Hungman, wants to ask a question. Is that not...
you've already answered the question.
Oh, okay.
Yes, you have. Thank you, sir. Rachel, I think it was Elizabeth Adeyemo had her hand raised earlier. Do you still want to ask your question because we're over time?
Oh.
Elizabeth Adeyemo.
Yes, I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you so much for such insightful presentations. It's really fascinating to hear the story come together from the archaeological fieldwork. I know that Shola Akintunde is here on the call, and I wanted to ask if this could be a project to perhaps petition the IIC to sort of intervene in terms of conservation of the project itself. I mean, seeing the potentials that the site holds, that could be a conversation for some time. But I just wanted to, directly bring Shola into that conversation, maybe to push for that subsequently. My question to Professor Ogundiran is, given the deep history of Oyo, I don't know if this is part of the research questions of the entire project, right? But given the deep history of Oyo itself, is it possible to somehow reconstruct the participation of Oyo in the incipient exchange systems of West Africa and even Sub-Saharan Africa, particularly in the first millennium CE, down to Trans-Saharan, like the foundations that was laid for Trans-Saharan trade and then subsequent Atlantic exchange system. So that would be my question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And Elizabeth Adeyemo was part of the team in 2018. Is it 2018 or 2019? I'm losing track of. 2018, she was part of the team. So thank you. Yes, I welcome collaboration on how to accomplish the conservation of the sites. I'm located in the US, so I would like those on the ground in Nigeria to please, if they can assist. They are not assisting me; they are assisting our society, and I think I will be glad to provide all the intellectual resources I have to make sure that happens, because it's kind of bleeds my heart to see these sites being lost. Now, to your question about the role of Oyo in, please, mute yourself, please. Thank you. Okay. In terms of the request, what the role that Oyo might have played in the West African exchange system, we will not know exactly the role that Oyo played in the early trans-Saharan trade until we figure out the very first Oyo kingdom. We don't know where that is. I know my sense is that it is somewhere around River Mushi and River Niger. It's somewhere around that corner there. But we are working on identifying several towns that might have been located as port towns in that area. But until we figure that out, we cannot really directly speak to the role that Oyo might have played in the trans-Saharan trade. We know that the early kingdom played a role in it, but we don't have archaeological evidence for it. But we do have abundant archaeological evidence and the historical evidence for the role that Oyo played in the transatlantic trade. Not because Oyo had any direct community on the coast, but it controlled the trade routes that linked Oyo-Ile to the coast. And it was also the state that brought in material from Central Sudan and exchanged them for materials coming from the coast. So it mediated a very vast territory in terms of commerce until the until the mid 18th century, when the Hausa traders found another route to push their commerce through present-day Gonja all the way to the coast, to Ashanti. So for about 150 years, Hausa traders, Kanuri traders relied on Oyo as the intermediary to the coast. So we have abundant archaeological and historical evidence for that.
Thank you so much, Prof. I think we'll have to stop here now because I know it's very fascinating, and we've had everybody join, connected for 15 minutes above the time, and we thank you all. Oyeyinka Laro, you asked the question, is the presentation available for replay? Yes, it will be available on our YouTube channel, so please feel free to avail yourself of listening to it again. Prof, listening to you, I could be listening to today's news. It's just that the setting is different and all of that. But there's so many things that show us that the more things change, the more they remain the same. And how much have we learned from the past? What can we learn to take forward? We really want to thank you. E-Commerce Nigeria is very grateful to you for taking time out on a Friday afternoon to address us, to share with us the wealth of your knowledge, of your research. We are grateful for the extensive work that you're doing in Nigeria, and for the knowledge that you're very willingly sharing with us and the rest of the world. To all those who have found time to join us from whichever time zone that you've connected from, we are very grateful for your time. We hope that you will also join us the next time we have another webinar. And if you would like to also share with us, I can see Tunde Babalola, if I'm not mistaken, you're an archaeologist too. And you've done some very interesting work. So we'll be also happy to host you sometime also to share some of the fascinating work that you have done. To everybody, we want to say thank you. Have a great weekend. Stay safe. And we look forward to the next time that we have something together. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.